Welcome patrons! One major theme I have been seeing in user-suggested videos is information on the kingdoms and countries of Thedas, as mentioned by YouTube user Sierra Grove and Reddit user Axel Evans. But this is going to be a huge project, and it's going to take a while to make one video per group, but it's going to happen, so consider this an announcement for my series on Thedas nations. I do want to say that, though, while this will be in the works, not every week is going to be part of this series, mostly because I would get so bored easily. So what does this make this video? Well, each video in this series will go over each particular nation in whole. This is a basic overview on Thedas on its own. So if you are new to this series and don't want to watch a ton of videos or too much detail, or perhaps you just want a refresher, this is what you're going to want to watch. Anyway, now that I have talked too much, I present to you the lands of Thedas. The Anderfels. Known as the Grey Warden capital, the Anders are said to be people of the extreme, perhaps due to the country's history and climate. Its landscape is described as dry and hard to farm on, perhaps due to the long history of blights in its borders. In fact, out of the 5 blights that have happened in Thedas, all but 1 have either started in or have at least touched the Anderfels. Perhaps due to the harsh conditions in the area, the Anderfels are considered to be the most pious nation in Thedas, with some religious criminals being even executed. On a more positive side, the Anderfels are known for their art. Antiva. Antiva is famous for its trade, and as such it's one of the wealthiest nations in Thedas. As much of Antiva is coastline, they have an unparalleled naval force, and by that I mean pirates, the Felicita Armada. Although not actually the country's official navy, the Armada allied with Antiva against the Canary and vowed to protect the nation from external forces, because they want to be the ones to control the waking seas. Although the nation is ruled by a king, no one really gives a shit about him, and the ones with the true power is a group of merchant princes. This group is not actually princes, but rather heads of various industries in Antiva. Another Antivan claim to fame is the House of Crows, the most notorious groups of assassins. Their reputation is so great that even other nations use their services. Estwatch. This teeny tiny little island is not really its own nation or country, but rather an island that is currently controlled by the Felicita Armada. The island has a surprisingly violent history, at first being a place to repair warships and slaving ships for Tevinter, a base for early Andrastians, and then later became a naval base sometime in the Storm Age during the fight with the Canary. Due to its history, it was believed to be haunted for a long time, which is why it was unclaimed for a long period of time. It's currently known as a lawless port and not exactly the best vacation spot. Ferelden. Perhaps the most known of the Thedas nations, as most of the Dragon Age series has been set in Ferelden. Ferelden is currently the youngest country among Thedas, as the land used to be controlled by Tevinter and Orlais during various time periods, and only regained its independence about 30 years before the first game starts. Because of its youth, much of the country is thought to be filled with uncivilized savages from other parts of Thedas. Ferelden also hosts a majority of the human tribes that are still unconnected to other nations, or at least all the human tribes that we know about are currently living in or around Ferelden. The Ferelden climate is often described as being colder than other parts of Thedas, with the land beyond the Kokaria Wilds are said to be a cold wasteland. Due to their history of occupation, many Fereldans have a mistrust for any government and often take matters of law into their own hands. They also really love dogs, or specifically one breed of dog, the super intelligent Mabari. Free Marches. The Free Marches are unique, as it's not really one nation, but rather a collection of city-states, perhaps similar to early American history. As such, each city-state has its own culture, so very quickly, a few factoids on each of the known city-states. Ansburg. Although a large center for agriculture, is described as being backwater. Hasmal. Because it's close to Tevinter, is apparently filled with refugees and escaped slaves. Hercynia. To quote World of Thedas Volume 1, the palatial city-state of the Amaranthian coast would be an ideal vacation spot if not for the taxes and frequent raider activity. Kirkwall. Known for its nautical trade and being a major trade hub, Kirkwall is the setting of Dragon Age 2. It's also kind of a shithole. Markham. Similar to Ansburg, but home to a large university that is a center for agricultural research, making its reputation more cultured. Starkhaven. The largest city in the Free Marches, famed for its riches and wonderful food, as well as its close ties to the Chantry, is also described as being pretentious. Tantervel. Described as being overly religious and over-eager with Chantry law, so again quoting World of Thedas Volume 1, a street urchin would get a year in the dungeon for something that would get him a pat on the back in Orlais. Wycombe. The second largest importer of Antivan wine, the first being Orlais, and is described as being the most free of the Free Marches, whatever that means. There are also a few named city-states that we know almost nothing about, including Hambleton and Cation. Kal Sharok. Thought to be lost for centuries, the Dwarven Tige of Cal Sharok was found to have survived on its own under the Hunterhorn Mountains in the early Dragon Age. Perhaps due to their long history of being isolated, they have been slow to let others in. It's said that the Tige doesn't put as big of an emphasis on the caste system as Orzammar, and the doors of all castes can serve in this assembly. Because long ago Orzammar cut off Cal Sharok and left the city for dead to the Darkspawn, there is a bit of bad blood between the two. Nevarra. Nevarra was once a simple city-state, similar to that of the Free Marches, until the Pentagos family took over rulership. Due to their city-state history, Nevarra has close ties with the Free Marches, while maintaining a bitter rivalry with Orlais over land disputes. What Nevarra is mainly known for is their dead. While the chantry teaches that the soul of the dead cross into the Fade on their way to meet the Maker, Nevarra adds that when this happens, it also displaces a spirit of the Fade. As such, an order of mages called the Mortalitasi are trusted to keep mummified corpses safe and clean in giant ornate crypts to house these displaced spirits. Outside of Nevarra, this practice is seen as fucking weird at best and against the Maker at worst. Orlais. Home of the Chantry and seen as one of the most powerful countries in Thedas, Orlais has become synonymous with extravagance. Orlais has one of the few universities in Thedas, and people from all over the continent flock there to share ideas and become educated by the finest minds in the land. Orlais has many quirks, perhaps one being the game, a polite term used to describe political maneuvering aimed to gather more influence. While this is mainly played between nobles, even those of a lower socioeconomic status play for their own reward. Perhaps their most notable quirk is their masks, worn to let others know of what family they belong to, and honestly just another thing to one-up others on. Most people of Orlais wear masks in front of others, and makeup is also used for both genders, a simpler mask when in more private company. While Orlais puts a big emphasis on arts and aesthetics, they are not a weak country, perhaps thanks to their fancy chevaliers, a military organization that only recruits nobles in their ranks and are some of the most highly trained warriors in Thedas. Orzammar. Known to be the largest Dwarven Tige, and until recently the only Dwarven Tige, Orzammar is home of the Dwarves. Located under the Frostback Mountains in the Ferelden Orlais area, the Dwarven city is proud to live a Dwarven lifestyle, unlike those worthless surface dwarves. The people of the Dwarven society fall into an inherited caste system, with your career being not only the way you make money, but your life and how people view and treat you. Orzammar makes the majority of its money on lyrium trade with outside nations. Par Vollen. While some believe that the first humans came from Par Vollen, and that is who built the mysterious pyramids on the island, we're not going to talk about that because now it's Qunari land. Tevinter controlled the island until 630 Steel, when the Qunari conquered the land. Now the land is inhabited by the Qunari and something called the Fex, which we literally know nothing else about. As none but the Qunari are permitted to enter Par Vollen, we know little about it, save for a time when a human seer was allowed to enter its borders. It's said that on the island, the main Qunari city of Kunandar is just as large as some of the largest cities in Thedas. Rivain. One of the few places in Thedas is said to have a friendly relationship with most races in Thedas, living beside both elves and Qunari in harmony. Rivain also seems to believe in community, and said communities work together to support each other. Rivain is also unique in that they are not Andrastians, so people of Rivain believe in a god that is nature rather than the Maker. Because Rivain does not have that close relationship with the Chantry, they have a unique view on magic. While the country still created a circle to appease the Chantry, no one really gives a shit about it, with mages, families, and friends living together with the mage in one giant community, and mages outside of the circle are fairly common and open to the community as a whole. Women have a unique role in the Rivaini community, as their culture believe that women are better suited to ruling. Many communities are ruled by elder women, most of whom are seers, mages who seek the help of spirits to better the community. The people of Rivain are also said to have a darker skin tone than the rest of Thedas. Seheron. As the largest island in Thedas, the land has a long history of being fought over by the Qunari and the Tevinter Imperium, as well as the natives fighting for their own independence. While currently the Qunari hold a majority of the land, the native Fog warriors still try to fight back, although many of the island's natives have sided with the Qunari, seeing the Tevinter Imperium's rule as the most oppressive one. Not much else is known about the island, but it's said that the Grey Warden's famed ride, the Griffins, have come from here. Tevinter Imperium. Once the largest nation that covered the entire continent, the Tevinter Imperium is now a shadow of what it once was, and even that is still very powerful. Tevinter has a long and rich history, but to sum it up, human tribes gathered together and began worshipping dragons called the Old Gods. They then said, man, fuck those elves, and destroyed the elven nation and enslaved its people, and then went on to dominate the rest of Thedas. A group of religious leaders who worshipped the dragons called Old Gods decided to say, man, fuck that veil, and pierced a hole in the divider between the material world and the Fade, bringing back the blight with them, and starting the corruption of the Old Gods. Eventually, another tribe of humans claiming to be led by a god called the Maker went on to free Thedas of their rule, but their leader Andraste was betrayed and killed in order to save the Tevinter we know today. Tevinter's ruler at the time felt bad for killing Andraste and as such adopted the Maker religion, which would eventually become the Chantry. Because the Chantry's view on magic, which is to say that they don't like it, Tevinter would later say, man, fuck those circles, and split from the Chantry, making its own Imperial Chantry run by men rather than women. Anyway, that long-winded history lesson was just to say that the rest of Thedas sees Tevinter as being the bad guys. The culture today is actually fairly similar to Orlais, but more gothic? Seriously though, Tevinter's society is largely based around magic, with most of the more powerful people being mages and many of the buildings in the city actually using magic in their construction. Tevinter also still largely uses slavery, with most slaves being elves, although human and Qunari slaves are not unusual. And that, dear patrons, is a base overview on the nations of Thedas. Eventually I will go over the human tribes, different organizations, and much more, but let's just start here first. As for what nation will go first in the series, I'll give you a hint. Do you still have lingering questions, proofs that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tweet me at @Gilderthon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillen on Reddit. Darash Shiral.